All right, there you go again. Queen of England died today. She was 96 years old. And I thought because she died, I can talk about why behavioral science is important. They're not really connected at all, but I thought that can be a very interesting subject to talk about. So, what is behavioral science? So I'm going to talk about this. Why behavioral science is important, and what is it? How can we learn it, and why do we need it? So these are really fundamental questions that we have to answer when somebody like me wants to pursue you to go and learn what is behavioral science. So what is it? Behavior in general is kind of like a repetition of our actions. Like there's some sort of actions that some of us, or better say all of us, are doing, and we're repeating it after one another. And each time we see each other, we see those behaviorals that are really connected to you, just like strings, or they're connected to your core. So, for instance, we see somebody who is constantly cleaning and organizing all around them. So they're kind of like organizers. How did we find it out that they have this such behavior? Because whenever we see them, they're nagging about why this place is so chaotic, why nothing is in its own place, and everything should be really, organized. We should really have control over everything. We should control everything. So these sort of behaviors we can actually witness in people, and they're really accurate and little details about all of us that we can actually see over time. And that is kind of like what we say behavior. So what is behavioral science? The science of knowing this form of behaviors, first about ourselves, which is kind of like knowing who we are, and then we can jump to another level and actually know what other people are doing in their life as well. But why is it good for? How can we actually get some benefit from learning such things? So you have a circle of your friends. They're kind of like people that you know for a long time, and they do certain things which are really on your nerve, and you have no way to understand why they're acting in this particular way. So in behavioral science, we actually found some very fundamental and accurate way to actually spot the differences between you and others, and how these behaviors are going to have their own synergies. Like, I do this, you do that. How can we actually mix this behavior, and how we can actually use it to go to another level? So that's a very important thing. Knowing behavioral science is going to give you this power to understand why people are acting in a very weird way. And this can be very helpful. So what other benefits can we get from this thing? So, for instance, you have a partner in your life, and there's some really serious questions about the way that they actually act, the way that they actually behave. So by knowing behavioral science, you can find common grounds pretty much easily between you and your partners. Doesn't matter, life partner, business partner, whatever partner. The weirdness about your siblings, your family, about everything that is happening around you. Well, in 20th century and even in early 21st century, it was kind of like a mystery to know all these little details. But nowadays, it's pretty much simple. Well, the very basic things that we can actually use, this is not really recommended, but it's part of the things that can actually help you in a very, very basic level to get you started. And that is a form of science called MBTI. Like the Myers-Briggs community and the 16th personality, which you can really easy Google it on internet and you can read about it. So, Carl Gustav Jung in early 20th century, he found out some patterns in people's behavior, which he could actually write about them, and he could actually understand them. And he had a book about cognitive functions. I think the book called Cognitive Function as well, cognitive behavior, kind of thing like that. So he actually explained in details that how these functions are working, the functions that are connected to your core. For instance, there are 4 different types of functions. The very first one is logic, thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing. He actually brought us down to this 4 category that some of us have form of introverted thinking, the other one is of us have extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, extroverted feeling, introverted intuition, extroverted intuition, and introverted sensing, and extroverted sensing. And in 1986, I assume, Myers-Briggs, it was a daughter and mom, they actually mixed all of these things together and they brought a system which they called the MBTI. I don't know what it stands for. Myers-Briggs. What? TI? What is that? I have no idea. You can Google it and you can leave it in the comments for me as well if you like. Or I will Google it myself. I don't know. But they brought it in a very beautiful category called 16 personality. And from 1986 in the US, they started using this technique and this behavioral test for their people use it for their companies. People use it for, I don't know, bringing people in different groups with their form of specialties. Like they are different in order of their functions and they're good for doing some specific things. And I don't know, I was reading this somewhere that people in spy agency use that, kind of like, I don't know, CIA or British intelligence, stuff like that. So it's very useful to know how people works. Without knowing behavioral science, you cannot have any idea that how you work or other people are working. Because by knowing these definitions of what is introverted thinking and what this function is capable of, and when it become a pair with, for instance, extroverted intuition, what it is capable of doing, which in another beautiful system called objective personality system, they explained it, for instance, as consume. Like, I don't want to make it so complicated, but imagine some of your behaviors are about 2 of your functions in your behavior, and they can work together, and they will let you to do some of the things that you actually do in life. So there are a lot of explanations. I don't want to just dig into that. I don't want to just turn this video into a master class of teaching you how to do behavioral science. But I'm telling you, after learning what is behavioral science, my life wasn't the same as before. I mean, like, I have no idea 8 years ago, 9 years ago, how I could talk to people and what was my interpretation of whatever they were talking and they were acting. It was really hard, and it was kind of like unbelievable. I have no idea how I could make friends, and about the things that they were talking, what was my feeling towards whatever they were saying. I had no idea. But after learning MBTI is a very basic and fundamental level of behavioral science, which is not that accurate, but it's so simple to learn. It's so simple to start behavioral science, and then you can get to some complicated stuff later. But after learning MBTI, I could see the relation between whatever people were acting and the way that they were talking. So it was a life-changing material to me. After learning it, my life was totally different. And today that I'm talking to you, I consider myself a professional behavioral scientist because after 8 years of searching and learning and reading and doing a lot of observation myself and testing a lot of people, interviewing them, now I can say after all this time, it's too much dedication, but you don't need to turn to somebody like me. You don't need to become a professional at behavioral science, but you can learn it for yourself for sake of knowing how things works. Well, I actually work with it. That's kind of like a part of my career as well. But I have to say, as a behavioral scientist, life become, 1,000 times easier than the time that I was not a behavioral scientist. Actually, you only can learn it. Like, for instance, we know what's mathematics, how we can actually multiply numbers to each other. And by doing simple math, by doing only simple math, we can solve a lot of little problems in our life. For instance, we can work with money, huh? But imagine you had no idea what was mathematics I was like, how could you live? I mean, I have no idea how people can live, for instance, without mathematics. And if you become, I don't know, a giant mathematician, well, you can do a lot with it. You can go and you can do a lot of complicated things. I don't want to mention it here, but every science is beautiful. And I mean, like, we don't need to become professional at all of them, but having some sense of how they're working and what is the basics of every single science in the world, which we like to learn, that can solve a lot of problems in our life. Simple problems, which without knowing them, it's pretty much hard to live. So I'm going to tell you, behavioral science is the ultimate goal. It's actually a life-changing science that with knowing how it works, only for yourself, your life become 10 times easier. Because, well, by knowing behavioral science, you see your own potentials. You see how you work, for instance. You see, all right, I mean, like, these differences that I could feel since I was just a little kid, these are only because of these functions and how they work? That's interesting. At least it is interesting to me. I mean, if you're kind of like watching me, you should be interested in those things as well. So I would highly recommend you to go and learn it, at least search about it. And the beautiful place to start knowing what is it all about is to go to 16 Personalities, kind of like that. I don't believe in such a system. It has a lot of problems. It has a lot of bugs. But it's a beautiful place to start because it's simple. For instance, the system that I work with, which is OBS, Objective Personality System, it's too complicated. It's too complicated. I mean, like, people are struggling learning such a thing because it's kind of like rocket science in its own way. And because it is rocket science, you need to at least dedicate 1 year of your life learning every single thing's in there. But after knowing what is behavioral science, what is MBTI, you will learn 8 cognitive functions, and you will understand how this 8 cognitive function works. And then when you can know yourself, you can see the functions in yourself, that what are those functions in you, and what function do you have as your main functions, and then as your shadow functions. You can go and search about Objective Personality System, and you can dive into it and can learn more if you're enthusiast with such thing like behavioral science. Then you can learn really complicated stuffs, and you can become professional. And it's hell of a science. It's hell of a science, and it'll change the world, I guess. This is kind of like future science. This is not about now. So if you don't know behavioral science now, you're totally okay. But 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to be the science that everybody needs to learn because it's going to make your life a lot easier. All right. Rest in peace, Queen Elizabeth, and hope you have a nice day as well. See you later.